Welcome back to Galaxy Recaps. Today we'll be diving into a thriller film titled The Courier. Enjoy the recap. In 1960, a high-ranking Soviet official, Oleg Penkovsky, finds himself at odds with his country's stance on the nuclear arms race. One evening in Moscow, he discreetly approaches two American tourists, handing them an envelope and urging them to deliver it directly to the deputy chief of mission at their embassy. 4 months later, at MI6 headquarters in London, CIA officer Emily Donovan seeks collaboration to prevent a nuclear war. Acting on Oleg's plea, she explains that Oleg, once an artillery officer during the war, now serves as the head of the State Committee for Scientific Research while secretly working for the Soviet intelligence unit, GRU. After MI6 agrees to cooperate, Emily proposes using the businessman with frequent international travel as a cover to approach Oleg without raising suspicion. That evening, British salesman Greville Wynne receives an unexpected visit and is summoned to a meeting the next day. Under their aliases, MI6 officer Dickie Franks and Emily brief him on the mission. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Greville hesitates, doubting his ability to handle espionage. Emily reassures him that he simply needs to set up a meeting with the State Committee for Scientific Research, as he would in any legitimate business expansion effort. After lunch, she emphasizes that secrecy is crucial for his own safety and that his role poses no real danger. Before leaving with Dickie, she hands him a tie clip, instructing him to wear it in Moscow. That evening, Greville informs his wife Sheila that he is considering a business trip to the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Oleg witnesses the execution of American spy Major Popov for treason. Upon arriving in Moscow, Greville takes in the sights on his way to the hotel. The next morning, he attends a meeting with the committee, where Oleg immediately identifies him by his tie clip. After the meeting, Oleg invites him to lunch, and as they converse, Greville mentions his 10-year-old son Andrew. Oleg, in turn, shares details about his own daughter. Impressed by Greville's unassuming nature, Oleg suggests they meet again later that evening. That night, they attend a performance at the Bolshoi Theater, where even Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev is present. After the show, Oleg confides in Greville, revealing his long-standing desire to bring about change. Although nervous about his role in this high-stakes operation, Greville asks about the next steps. Oleg instructs him to return to London and invite him to visit as part of a trade delegation. A surprisingly simple task that leaves Greville momentarily stunned. Back in London, Greville triumphantly reports to Emily and Dickie. When Oleg later arrives as planned, Greville takes him, along with Sheila, on a night out in the West End. That evening, after ensuring everyone returns safely to their hotel rooms, Oleg meets with Greville, Emily, and Dickie. Having completed his assignment, Greville departs while Oleg delivers a chilling revelation. Contrary to any notions of easing tensions, Khrushchev is aggressively seeking a confrontation with America. Emily carefully takes notes as their conversation is secretly recorded. Oleg discloses that the Soviet Union lacks first-strike capability due to America's nuclear arsenal's overwhelming superiority. The next day, Greville expresses his reluctance to continue spying, citing his family's safety. However, Emily, already well prepared, delivers a sobering reality. If the UK ever faces a nuclear strike from the Soviet Union, the public will receive only a 4-minute warning before impact. Emily points out that not only will Greville be unable to reach his family within the 4-minute warning window, but the available shelters won't provide much protection either. In an effort to persuade him, she offers access to secure government shelters. However, Greville, angered by the manipulation, storms off, while Emily remains confident that he will eventually agree. Later that evening, Oleg is invited to Greville's home for dinner. Over their meal, Greville comes to realize that Oleg genuinely believes in his mission, that change for the better is possible despite the political tensions between their countries. Still troubled by concerns for his family's safety, Greville is reassured that, as a mere courier unaware of the contents of the packages he transports, he won't face execution if caught. Furthermore, Oleg explains that the British government could negotiate his release by trading a Soviet asset, meaning Greville might not spend more than 2 years in captivity. However, Oleg warns that if Greville is caught, he himself will inevitably be exposed, and the consequences for him would be far worse. Oleg's confidence in their mission finally convinces Greville to commit, and his first lesson is clear. While in Russia, he must be cautious of everyone, as the entire nation functions under constant surveillance. Maintaining his cover as a businessman in Moscow, Greville ensures his activities remain inconspicuous, while Oleg continues gathering intelligence on Soviet nuclear advancements. In return for the risks he is taking, Greville requests assurance that Sheila and Andrew will be taken care of should anything happen to him. As tensions escalate in the nuclear arms race, Greville's role becomes even more critical. However, Sheila, kept in the dark for her own safety, begins to sense that something is off. At home, Greville grows distant and increasingly agitated. In Moscow, the pressure never subsides. He remains hyper-aware of his surroundings as Oleg covertly provides him with evidence, including details on the Soviets' detonation of a massive 50-megaton bomb. Ominously dubbed the King of Bombs, Greville makes frequent trips to Moscow, forcing himself to stay alert at all times. While the joint CIA MI6 operation continues expanding, the immense pressure takes its toll on him. During a family camping trip, he snaps at Andrew over a minor issue. Later that evening, when Sheila confronts him about his growing frustration, he vaguely attributes it to struggles in his business. Unconvinced, she confides in a friend. And as Greville continues his trips to Moscow without explanation, she begins to suspect that he might be having an affair. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Greville meets Oleg's family, and the two discuss defection. Oleg expresses his deep desire for his daughter to grow up in a society where she is free to make her own choices. Over time, Oleg uncovers a disturbing Soviet plan to turn Cuba into a nuclear threat against the United States. When Emily reports this to her colleagues at the CIA, they initially dismiss the claims as implausible. However, the director orders further investigation through their contacts and sources in Cuba. Oleg later secures photographic evidence and military documents, handing them over to Greville during his next visit. That evening, in his hotel room, Greville notices a misplaced book, an unsettling sign that someone has searched his room. The following morning, KGB officer Gribanov meets with Oleg, casually mentioning that Greville has been spotted frequently in Moscow, often meeting with various officials. Gribanov asks if Oleg has observed anything suspicious about Greville's behavior. Keeping his composure, Oleg carefully replies that Greville is merely conducting business but promises to monitor him more closely in the future. Upon Greville's return to London, he reports that his hotel room in Moscow had been searched. Dickie immediately pulls him from the operation, thanking him for a job well done. However, Greville is deeply concerned about Oleg, having left without a chance to warn him. He is reassured that Oleg will be fine, though the uncertainty lingers. After Greville departs, Emily insists they still need him to maintain contact with Oleg, but she is told that Oleg will be coming to London soon. However, before this can happen, Gribanov discreetly poisons Oleg, causing him to collapse in his office. Meanwhile, Greville informs Sheila that his business in Moscow is officially over. At the same time, with clear skies over Cuba, the US finally confirms the Soviet plan, escalating tensions. In the hospital, Oleg is advised to take a few days of rest, and his wife shares unexpected news. She is pregnant. Back in London, Greville grows increasingly worried about Oleg and his family. As American reports on Soviet activity in Cuba flood the media, both Emily and even Khrushchev himself acknowledge the growing crisis. When Oleg returns to work, an official from the Trade Ministry informs him that he will not be joining the delegation traveling to London for the trade fair. Being barred from leaving Moscow is a clear sign that he is under surveillance. Understanding the danger, Dickie refuses Greville's request to intervene, believing it's too risky. With both nations on the brink of war, Greville refuses to abandon his friend. Against Dickie's direct orders, he decides to travel to Moscow. Emily, seeing his determination, offers to go with him and promises assistance in getting them out safely. However, before he can leave, Greville faces another problem at home. Sheila is devastated to realize that he is heading to Moscow yet again. Landing in Moscow the following evening, Greville meets Oleg, and the two head to his hotel room to ensure their conversation remains private. They lower their voices and whisper over the sound of the radio for added secrecy. Meanwhile, using a new alias, Emily begins mapping out a safe escape route for Oleg and his family. Once Greville confirms that Oleg is ready to defect, Emily provides him with a detailed escape plan, which he discreetly hands over to Oleg. Later, they attend a ballet performance, after which Oleg reviews the plan, carefully assessing every detail. The next day, Greville prepares for his departure while Oleg informs his family that he will meet them after lunch. Meanwhile, Emily discusses with her superior whether the Soviets will withdraw from Cuba. As Oleg readies himself to leave his life behind, the plan is set in motion. However, unknown to them all, the KGB has already been watching. Emily and her contact are quickly tracked. barely managing to evade capture. At the same time, Oleg drops Greville off at the airport, but as Greville waits for his flight, KGB officials board the plane, causing an unexpected delay. Meanwhile, Emily races towards Oleg's home, unaware that she is already too late. When Oleg arrives, ready to rush his family out, he finds the KGB waiting for him. Outside, Emily is also intercepted and taken to the American embassy, where she is formally served with an order to leave Moscow within 24 hours. Oleg's wife is stunned upon learning of his betrayal. Adding to his shock, Gribunov smugly reveals that Oleg's home had been searched and placed under surveillance while he was in the hospital. With no escape left, Oleg is arrested and taken away. Back at the airport, Greville is also pulled from the plane, detained and escorted into custody. Meanwhile, Emily returns to London where she meets Dickie. Acknowledging her miscalculation in pushing to save Oleg, she accepts responsibility, but Dickie instead appreciates her efforts. Together, they break the devastating news to Sheila. Greville has been arrested. However, they withhold the full truth, revealing only that he is facing potential espionage charges. When Sheila insists that Emily tell her the truth, Emily praises Greville's courage and bravery. She reassures Sheila that he will be released once the Soviets realize his innocence. However, she urges her to be extremely careful when discussing this matter with anyone. Sheila must convincingly deny any possibility that her husband was involved in espionage. Meanwhile, in prison, Greville maintains his claim of innocence, firmly telling Gribunov that he had no knowledge of the contents of the packages he delivered. Days pass as he endures the appalling prison conditions, horrible food, freezing temperatures, and deteriorating health. One day, Gribunov attempts to bribe him with English food in exchange for a confession. But Greville, unwilling to betray the truth even for his family's sake, refuses the offer. When Sheila's friend visits and inquires about Greville, she follows Emily's instructions precisely, downplaying the idea that he could ever be involved in espionage. Frustrated by Greville's resilience, Gribunov tries another approach. He brings up the fact that America had stationed nuclear missiles in Turkey for years, accusing them of hypocrisy for reacting so strongly to the Soviet missiles in Cuba. He also attempts to demoralize Greville by claiming that Britain has abandoned him and does not care about his fate. None of this sways Greville, who continues to insist on his innocence. However, when the guards strip his cell bare, taking even his blanket, he finally snaps. His outburst results in a brutal beating, yet he is still left without a blanket. 6 months later, a severely malnourished and sickly Greville is finally allowed a visit from Sheila. She manages to tell him that the Soviets have backed down from Cuba before being abruptly cut off. Just hearing this news and knowing that she was able to visit fills Greville with renewed hope. Despite facing the possibility of years more in prison, the thought of home lifts his spirits and gives him something to hold on to. Back in London, Emily pressures MI6 to negotiate a prisoner exchange, pushing for a Soviet prisoner to trade for Greville's release. Meanwhile, after repeated failures to break Greville's will, Gribunov arranges a meeting between him and Oleg. Both men look exhausted and worn down from their time in captivity. With Gribunov listening in, Oleg apologizes to Greville and confesses that he chose to save his family by telling the KGB the truth. He explains that the packages he handed over to Greville were instrumental in helping America locate the Soviet missiles in Cuba. However, he makes it clear that Greville had no knowledge of what he was transporting, thereby proving his innocence. Hearing this, Greville finds solace in knowing that their efforts were not in vain. He tells Oleg that their mission was successful. The Soviets withdrew their missiles from Cuba, preventing a nuclear war. Before he can say anything further, guards rush in and take him away. It takes another year before the Soviets finally release Greville. In April 1964, he is exchanged for Soviet spy Kanan Molody and returns home a changed man. Now he truly believes in the power of ordinary people, realizing that, together with Oleg, they managed to smuggle over 5,000 classified Soviet military documents to the West. Later, it is revealed that Oleg, one of the most valuable Soviet sources for the West, was executed for treason and buried in an unmarked grave. However, his family was allowed to remain in Moscow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.